The apex predators, the galaxy was a dark place. For 3,000 years, fear ruled every star system. The Nexari hegemony had made sure of that. 3 species controlled everything. They called themselves the apex predators, and they were right. The Sauroch looked like giant lizards that walked on 2 legs. Their scales were harder than most metals, and their yellow eyes never showed mercy. They were the generals and admirals of the hegemony. Every battle plan came from their cold, calculating minds. The Zaphirans were different, but just as deadly. They looked like massive insects with 4 arms and wings that could carry them through space without ships. But the scariest thing about them was their minds. All Zaphirans shared one giant brain. When one knew something, they all knew it. When one felt pain, they all felt it. This made them perfect soldiers who never questioned orders. The 3rd species was the strangest. The Nexari were made of living crystal. They looked like walking diamonds that could change their shape at will. Light bent around them in weird ways. They could shoot energy beams that could melt planets. Their ships were grown, not built, from the same crystal as their bodies. Together, these 3 species had conquered most of the galaxy. They moved from star to star like a plague. First, they would demand surrender. If a species said no, the hegemony would wipe them out completely. If they said yes, they became slaves. The hegemony had destroyed over 200 different species. Entire worlds were now empty rocks floating in space. The lucky ones were the species that surrendered early. They got to live, but only as servants to their new masters. Commander Nexari stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Bone Crusher. He was a Sauroch, and like all his kind, he was huge. His claws could cut through steel, and his bite could crush bones. Right now, he was looking at a hologram of their next target. Another primitive world, said his 2nd officer, also a Sauroch. These creatures call themselves humans. They have barely left their home planet. Nexari studied the blue and green world spinning slowly in the hologram. How many ships do they have? Maybe a few hundred. Small ones. Their weapons are pathetic. We could destroy their entire fleet with just one of our dreadnoughts. Nexari nodded. This would be easy. It always was. These humans had only recently learned to travel between stars. They had no real weapons, no shields, and no experience fighting in space. It would be over in a few hours. Send the usual message, Nexari ordered. Give them a chance to surrender. The message was always the same. Submit to the hegemony or be destroyed. Most species chose to submit. The smart ones did anyway, but something was different this time. The humans sent back a message that surprised everyone on the bridge, no. That was it. Just one word. No explanation, no begging for mercy, no attempts to negotiate. Just a simple, clear no. Nexari's officers looked at each other in confusion. This had never happened before. Every species they had met either surrendered immediately or tried to run away. None had ever just said no and waited for the attack to begin. Maybe they don't understand, suggested the 2nd officer. Should we explain what will happen to them? They understand, Nexari said, his voice low and dangerous. They're just stupid, very well. We'll teach them the price of defying the hegemony. The Sauroch battle group was massive, 50 ships, each one the size of a city. The smallest could destroy a moon. The largest could crack a planet in half. Against them, the humans had maybe 300 tiny ships that looked like metal toys. As the Sauroch ships moved into attack position, Nexari expected the humans to panic. He expected them to send desperate messages begging for mercy. He expected them to scatter and run. Instead, the human ships moved forward. Sir, his weapons officer said, the humans are advancing toward us. Nexari blinked. That made no sense. Are they trying to ram us? I think so, sir. This was madness. Ramming attacks were suicide. Even if a human ship managed to hit a Sauroch vessel, it would be like an insect hitting a wall. The human ship would be destroyed and the Sauroch ship would barely notice. Open fire, Nexari ordered. End this quickly. The space around Earth lit up with weapons fire. Massive energy beams from the Sauroch ships reached out like fingers of death. The first wave of human ships simply vanished, turned into clouds of metal and fire. But more kept coming. The second wave of human ships was different. They had attached huge chunks of metal to their fronts like battering rams. When the Sauroch weapons hit them, the ships broke apart, but the metal chunks kept flying forward. One piece of metal, the size of a building, slammed into the side of a Sauroch destroyer. The impact created a hole big enough to fly a shuttle through. Atmosphere and crew members were sucked out into space. How did they do that? Nexari's 2nd officer asked. staring at the damage reports. Before anyone could answer, the third wave attacked. These human ships were even stranger. They seemed to be civilian vessels, cargo ships, passenger liners, even small pleasure craft. But they had all been modified in crazy ways. A human cargo ship opened its bay doors and released thousands of small objects. At first, the Sarok thought they were escape pods. Then the objects exploded all around the Sarok formation. Each explosion was small, but there were so many that several Sarok ships lost their shields. A passenger liner had somehow turned its dining hall into a giant magnetic cannon. It fired chunks of metal at incredible speed. The chunks were too small to seriously damage a Sarok ship, but they hit like hail, damaging sensors and weapons. A pleasure yacht, tiny compared to the warships around it, flew straight at Thexkar's flagship. The yacht's owner had apparently filled it with explosives. When it hit the Bone Crusher's shields, the explosion was so bright it blinded half the sensors on nearby ships. "This is insane," Thexkar muttered. "They're throwing their lives away for nothing." But as the battle continued, something strange happened. The human attack started to work. Not because any single attack was powerful enough to hurt the Sarok ships, but because there were so many of them. The humans kept coming, wave after wave, each one trying something new and unexpected. A group of human mining ships had filled their cargo holds with rocks from an asteroid field. They flew close to Sarok ships and opened their holds, creating clouds of stone that jammed sensors and damaged smaller craft. Human scientists had apparently studied the few pieces of Sarok technology they could find and built crude copies of Sarok weapons. The copies barely worked, but they worked well enough to hurt shields and armor. Most disturbing of all, the humans started using their own destroyed ships as weapons. When a human vessel was crippled, other ships would push it toward Sarok targets, turning wreckage into guided missiles. Hours passed. The Sarok were winning, but it was taking much longer than expected. They had destroyed hundreds of human ships, but thousands more kept appearing. Every human civilian seemed to have joined the fight. Then something happened that made Thexkar's blood run cold. A human ship managed to get close enough to attach something to the hull of a Sarok cruiser. Seconds later, the cruiser exploded from the inside. "What was that?" Thexkar demanded. "Unknown, sir. It appears the humans have developed some kind of boarding torpedo. A small craft that can cut through our hull and deliver an explosive charge inside." Thexkar stared at the tactical display. The humans were learning. In the middle of battle, they were adapting their tactics, trying new things, finding ways to hurt ships that should have been invulnerable. When the battle finally ended, the Sarok had won. But the victory felt hollow. They had lost 8 ships and had dozens more damaged. Against primitives. Against a species that had never fought a space battle before today. As his fleet limped away from Earth, Thexkar realized something that chilled him to the bone. The humans had not been trying to win. They had been trying to learn, and they had learned very quickly indeed. First contact gone wrong. The news of Thexkar's defeat spread through the hegemony like poison. In 3,000 years, no species had ever bloodied a Sarok fleet and lived to tell about it. The other predator species were furious and embarrassed. Queen Mind Zixara felt the anger of 10 billion Zaphirans flow through her consciousness. As the supreme leader of the collective, every thought and emotion of her species passed through her mind. Right now, those thoughts were focused on one thing: revenge. The Zaphirans were different from the cold, calculating Sarok. Where the lizards planned and schemed, the insects acted on instinct and overwhelming force. They were the hegemony's shock troops, the ones who swarmed enemy positions until nothing was left alive. Zixara's body was beautiful in a terrifying way. She was 12 feet tall, with 4 powerful arms and wings that shimmered like oil on water. Her compound eyes could see in every direction at once, and her mind was connected to every Zaphirian in the galaxy. "The humans will pay for this insult," she spoke, her voice echoing through the minds of every Zaphirian in the war fleet. "We will show them what happens when inferior species dare to resist the collective." The Zaphirian fleet was unlike anything else in the galaxy. Their ships were not built, they were grown. Each vessel was a living creature, bred for war over thousands of generations. The smallest ship was the size of a whale and could carry 50 Zaphirian warriors. The largest were like flying cities, home to millions of the insect soldiers. But the most terrifying thing about the Zaphirian fleet was not its size. It was the fact that every ship, Every warrior, every weapon was controlled by a single mind. When Zixara decided to attack, 10 million ships moved as one. When she felt pain, every Zaphirian warrior became more dangerous. When she was angry, the entire fleet became a weapon of pure rage. The humans had 6 months to prepare for the second attack. Earth's leaders knew the Sorok would return with allies, and they worked frantically to get ready. But how do you fight an enemy that has conquered most of the galaxy? Captain Sarah Chen stood in the command center of the space station Hope, humanity's newest and most advanced military facility. She was young for a fleet commander, only 35, but the war had forced humanity to promote people based on skill rather than age. "What's our status?" she asked her staff. "We've built every ship we can," reported her chief engineer. 2,000 new vessels, all based on what we learned from the Sorok attack. They're not pretty, but they should be more effective than what we had before. Chen nodded. The new human ships were ugly, brutal things. They had been designed for one purpose: to hurt the enemy before being destroyed. Because everyone knew that's what would happen. The humans would fight and they would die, but maybe they could take some of the enemy with them. "What about allies?" Chen asked. "Still working on it," said her intelligence officer. "We've sent messages to every species we can contact. So far, no one wants to fight the hegemony. They're all too scared." Chen understood their fear. The hegemony had crushed hundreds of species. Why would anyone risk joining a fight against impossible odds? The answer came when the Zaphirian fleet arrived. It was like watching a plague descend from the stars. Millions of bioships, each one alive and hungry for battle. They moved in perfect coordination, creating patterns in space that hurt to look at. But this time the humans were ready. The first surprise came when the Zaphirians tried to communicate. In every previous conquest they had offered the same choice: surrender or die. But when they sent their message to Earth, something impossible happened. The humans jammed their communications. This had never happened before. The Zaphirian collective mind depended on perfect communication between all ships. Jamming was supposed to be impossible because the bioships used living neural networks instead of radio waves. But the humans had spent 6 months studying every piece of Sorok technology they had captured. They had learned things about energy patterns and communication systems that they should not have been able to understand, and they had built jammers that could disrupt even biological signals. For the first time in centuries, parts of the Zaphirian fleet could not hear the Queen Mind. The effect was immediate and terrifying. Ships that had moved in perfect formation suddenly became clumsy. Warriors who had never known doubt began to hesitate. The collective's greatest strength became a weakness when it was taken away, but Zixara was not easily defeated. She ordered her ships to attack in smaller groups, each one staying close enough to maintain communication. The strategy worked, but it meant the Zaphirian fleet could not use its full power. The battle that followed was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Human ships swarmed the Zaphirian biovessels like antibodies fighting an infection. They had learned from the Sorok battle, and their new tactics were more sophisticated. Human engineers had figured out how to build weapons that could hurt living ships. They used sonic cannons that confused the biovessels' nervous systems. They fired toxic chemicals that made the ships sick. They even created viruses that could infect the enemy craft and turn them against each other. But the most effective human weapon was something the Zaphirians had never encountered: unpredictability. The collective was used to fighting enemies who followed logical patterns. Military species attacked military targets. Civilian species tried to flee. Everyone acted according to their nature and training. Humans did not follow any patterns at all. A group of human cargo ships painted themselves to look like asteroids and drifted through the Zaphirian formation, attacking with hidden weapons when the enemy got close. A human hospital ship broadcast medical emergency signals while secretly carrying enough explosives to destroy a small moon. Human civilian volunteers used personal spacecraft to deliver suicide attacks against high-value targets. Most confusing of all, the humans seemed to coordinate their efforts without any central command. When one group's attack failed, another group would immediately try something completely different. It was as if the entire species was thinking as one, but in a way that was totally different from the Zaphirian collective. The Zaphirians fought with the fury of a disturbed hive, but fury was not enough. Every time they adapted to a human tactic, the humans would try something new. The battle became a test of who could evolve faster. The perfectly coordinated collective or the chaotically creative humans. Hours turned into days. The space around Earth became a graveyard of ships from both sides. Zixara could feel her fleet weakening, not just from losses but from something worse. Uncertainty. The Queen Mind had never experienced doubt before. For thousands of years, every battle had followed the same pattern. The collective would arrive, demonstrate its overwhelming power, and the enemy would either surrender or be destroyed. Victory was always certain, but these humans refused to follow the pattern. They kept fighting long after any reasonable species would have given up. They took terrible losses and somehow turned those losses into weapons. When their ships were destroyed, they used the wreckage to damage enemy vessels. When their warriors were killed, other humans would study how they died and find ways to make those deaths more effective. Most disturbing of all, the humans were learning from the Zaphirans themselves. They captured bioships and somehow figured out how they worked. They studied Zaphirian tactics and found ways to counter them. They even started using their own version of collective coordination, but without giving up their individual creativity. On the 5th day of battle, something happened that shook the collective to its core. A group of human ships managed to get close enough to Zixara's command vessel to jam her personal communications. For 10 minutes, the Queen Mind was cut off from her people. In those 10 minutes, she experienced something no Zaphirian had felt in millennia: loneliness. She was alone in her own head, with only her own thoughts for company. The sensation was so alien and terrifying that she nearly went insane. When communications were restored, Zixara made a decision that shocked every Zaphirian in the fleet. She ordered a retreat. "But we can still win," her war leader protested through the collective link. "We outnumber them 1,000 to 1. Numbers mean nothing if we cannot use them effectively," Zixara replied. "These humans fight like no species we have ever encountered. They are learning faster than we can adapt. If we continue this battle, we risk losing the entire fleet." As the Zaphirian bioships began to withdraw, something else happened that would be remembered for generations. The humans did not pursue them. Instead, they sent a message: "We did not want this fight. We only wanted to be left alone. But if you come back, we will be ready. And next time, we will be stronger." For the first time in 3,000 years, a hegemony fleet had been forced to retreat. The galaxy watched in amazement as the supposedly invincible collective limped home, leaving behind thousands of destroyed bioships and something even more valuable: the knowledge that the hegemony could be beaten. Zixara spent the long journey home trying to understand what had happened. The humans were not stronger than the Zaphirians. They were not smarter than the Sarok. They were not more advanced than the Nexari. But they had something none of the hegemony species possessed: the ability to work together without losing their individuality. Each human fought as part of a greater whole while still thinking for themselves, the swarm learns. Fear the defeat of the Zaphirian collective sent shockwaves through the hegemony. 2 of their species had tried to destroy the humans and failed. Now it was time for the third and most powerful member to act. Nexus Prime stood in his crystal palace, watching the stars through walls made of living diamond. He was the emperor of the Nexari, a being so ancient that he remembered when the first hegemony ships had left their home worlds. His body was a work of art, each crystal facet reflecting light in ways that hurt organic eyes to look at. The Nexari were the technological masters of the hegemony. While the Sorok planned and the Zaphirians swarmed, the Nexari created weapons that could rewrite the laws of physics. Their ships were grown from crystalline matrices that could repair themselves and evolve new abilities. Their energy weapons could turn matter into pure light or create black holes the size of marbles. "The humans have made fools of our allies," Nexus Prime said to his war council. His voice sounded like wind chimes in a storm. "But they have not faced true power yet." The Nexari fleet that assembled was smaller than the Zaphirian swarm but far more dangerous. Each ship was a masterpiece of crystal engineering, beautiful and deadly. The smallest could destroy a city with a single shot. The largest could crack a planet's core and watch the world tear itself apart. But the most feared ships in the Nexari fleet were the reality shapers. These massive crystalline dreadnoughts could bend the laws of space and time around them. They could make energy weapons bounce harmlessly off their hulls, or cause enemy ships to age 1,000 years in seconds. Admiral Sarah Chen had been promoted again. She was now in command of all human space forces, a job that would have been impossible for one person just 2 years ago. But the war had changed humanity in ways no one had expected. The human fleet had grown beyond all recognition. They now had allies from dozens of species that the hegemony had conquered or enslaved. The Keth were a race of living metal that could merge with human ships to make them stronger. The Voss were energy beings that could power human weapons directly. The Trelawney were master engineers who had taught humans how to build better engines and shields. But most importantly, humanity had learned how to think as one species, while still allowing every individual to make their own choices. It was like the Zaphirian collective mind, but voluntary. When the humans fought, they shared information instantly across their entire fleet. Every pilot knew what every other pilot was thinking. Every engineer could access the knowledge of every other engineer. The difference was that any human could choose to leave the network at any time. They could think private thoughts, make individual decisions, and disagree with the group consensus. This made them less efficient than the Zaphirians in some ways, but far more creative and adaptable. The Nexari will be different from what we've faced before, Chen told her officers during their final briefing. They don't rely on numbers or coordination. They use pure technological superiority. Their ships can do things that seem impossible. So how do we fight them? Asked Commander Torres, a veteran of both previous battles. The same way we've always fought, Chen replied. We adapt, we learn, and we refuse to give up. When the Nexari fleet arrived at Earth, they did something the previous attackers had not. They sent no messages, made no demands, and gave no warnings. They simply began to destroy everything they could see. The first wave of attacks was devastating. Nexari energy beams reached across space like the fingers of an angry god. Human ships simply vanished, turned into clouds of atoms. Space stations that had taken years to build were erased in seconds. Even the asteroid belt around Earth was cleared away, turned into glittering dust. But the humans had learned from their previous battles. They no longer kept all their forces in one place. Human ships and bases were scattered throughout the solar system, hidden in asteroid fields behind moons, and even inside the gas giants' atmospheres. When the Nexari finished their first bombardment, they expected to see the wreckage of human civilization floating in space. Instead, they found nothing but empty void where the human fleet used to be. Where are they? Demanded Nexus Prime. His answer came from everywhere at once. Human ships appeared from behind asteroids, from inside gas clouds, and from places where no ships should have been able to hide. They had learned stealth technology from the Keth and cloaking devices from the Voss. The entire human fleet had been invisible, waiting for the right moment to strike. The battle that followed was unlike anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. The Nexari fought with weapons that seemed to defy reality itself. They created gravity wells that crushed human ships like tin cans. They fired beams of pure time that aged hull metal until it crumbled into rust. They even opened tiny wormholes that swallowed enemy vessels and spat them out in distant star systems. But the humans had their own surprises. They had spent 2 years studying captured hegemony technology, and they had learned things that even the Nexari did not know. Human scientists had discovered ways to combine Sorok engineering with Zaphirian biotechnology and their own creativity. Human ships began to do impossible things. They merged with Keth allies to become living metal creatures that could reshape themselves mid-battle. They used Voss energy beings as living power sources, allowing them to fire weapons that should have required entire power plants. They even learned to create their own small wormholes, using captured Nexari technology in ways its creators had never imagined. The real shock came when the humans revealed their secret weapon. They had learned how to think like Nexari. The crystal beings' greatest advantage was their ability to process information at the speed of light. Their crystalline brains could calculate thousands of battle scenarios in the time it took an organic mind to form a single thought. This made them nearly impossible to surprise or outmaneuver. But the humans had found a way around this advantage. They had created a new kind of artificial intelligence, based on captured Nexari technology, but enhanced with human creativity and allied assistance. This AI could think as fast as any Nexari, but it could also do something the crystal beings could not. It could be unpredictable. The AI, which the humans called Oracle, began to coordinate the human fleet in ways that confused and frightened the Nexari. Human ships moved in patterns that made no mathematical sense but somehow worked perfectly. They attacked targets that seemed random, but always turned out to be exactly the right choice. They used weapons combinations that should have failed but instead created devastating new effects. Most disturbing of all, Oracle seemed to be learning from the battle itself. Every time the Nexari tried a new tactic, the AI adapted and found a counter. It was as if the humans had created their own version of Nexari intelligence, but one that could grow and change in real time. The turning point came when a human strike force managed to board one of the reality-shaper dreadnoughts. This should have been impossible. The ship's defenses could twist space and time to prevent any boarding attempt. But the humans had used a combination of technologies that created a brief gap in the defenses. What happened next sent fear through every Nexari in the fleet. The humans did not try to destroy the ship or capture it. Instead, they infected it with a virus created by Voss energy beings and Trelani engineers. The virus spread through the ship's crystalline nervous system, turning the reality shaper against its own fleet. The sight of a Nexari dreadnought firing on its own allies was something the crystal beings had never imagined possible. Their ships were supposed to be perfect, incorruptible beyond the reach of any outside influence, but the humans had found a way to turn perfection into a weakness. The battle raged for days. The Nexari threw everything they had at the humans using weapons that could have destroyed entire star systems. But for every ship they destroyed, the humans seemed to learn something new. Human engineers figured out how to create crude copies of Nexari reality-bending technology. Human pilots learned to fly in ways that confused Nexari targeting systems. Human scientists even found ways to turn Nexari weapons against themselves. But the most important thing the humans learned was that the Nexari were not really invincible. They were just very, very advanced, and anything that could be built could be understood, improved upon, and eventually defeated. The end came when Oracle managed to hack into the Nexari fleet's central communication network. For a few crucial minutes, the AI had access to the entire tactical picture from the Nexari perspective. It used this information to coordinate a massive human assault on Nexus Prime's flagship. The attack involved every human ship and ally in the solar system. Thousands of vessels converged on the Nexari command ship from every direction at once. They used every weapon, every trick, and every desperate tactic they had learned in 3 years of constant warfare. Nexus Prime's ship was the most advanced vessel in the galaxy. Its crystalline hull could repair itself faster than most weapons could damage it. Its reality-shaping engines could make attacks pass harmlessly through empty space. Its defensive systems could stop anything the hegemony had ever faced. But when diamonds shatter, the news of Nexus Prime's death traveled across the galaxy faster than light itself. For the first time in 3,000 years, one of the hegemony's supreme leaders was dead. The perfect crystalline emperor, who had seemed immortal and invincible, had been destroyed by the same primitive species that had humiliated the Sorok and defeated the Zaphirans. Panic spread through hegemony space like a plague. Enslaved species whispered in dark corners about rebellion. Conquered worlds wondered if freedom might be possible. Even some of the hegemony's own citizens began to question whether their leaders were really as powerful as they claimed. The 3 surviving leaders of the hegemony met in emergency session. General Thexkar represented the Sorok military forces. Queen Mind Zixara spoke for the Zaphirian collective, and Crystal Lord Vexthal, Nexus Prime's younger brother, now led the Nexari Empire. "This has gone too far," Vexthal said, his crystalline voice filled with rage and grief. "The humans have made us look weak in front of the entire galaxy. We must end this before our empire collapses." "Agreed," said Thexkar, "but we cannot underestimate them again. Each of our species has tried to destroy them alone and failed. Perhaps it is time to work together." Zixara's compound eyes glittered with anger. "The collective demands vengeance. These humans have caused us to doubt ourselves, to question our superiority. Such thoughts are poison to our kind." "Then we are agreed," Vexthal concluded. "We will combine our fleets and attack Earth with everything we have. No more single-species assaults. No more holding back. We will bring the full might of the hegemony to bear on these troublesome primates." The combined hegemony fleet that assembled was the largest military force in galactic history. Thousands of Sorok warships provided tactical coordination and heavy weapons. Millions of Zaphirian bioships brought overwhelming numbers and hive mind efficiency. Hundreds of Nexari crystal vessels contributed reality-bending technology and city-killing firepower. But this time, the humans were not alone. Admiral Sarah Chen stood in the command center of New Hope, humanity's newest space fortress. Around her, the tactical displays showed a sight that would have been impossible 5 years ago. A truly galactic alliance. The Keth had brought their living metal ships, vessels that could reshape themselves into any form needed for battle. The Voss contributed their energy beings, creatures of pure light that could power weapons or serve as weapons themselves. The Trelawney provided their engineering expertise, having helped humanity build ships that combined the best technology from dozens of species. But those were just the beginning. Word of humanity's victories had spread throughout the galaxy, reaching species that had been hiding from the hegemony for centuries. The Mordai, who looked like living shadows, brought stealth technology that could make entire fleets invisible. The Quintel, beings of crystallized sound, offered sonic weapons that could shatter any material. The ancient Zarketh, survivors of the first hegemony conquest, emerged from their hidden refugees with knowledge of hegemony weaknesses that had been gathering dust for millennia. Most surprising of all were the defectors from the hegemony itself. Some Sorok military officers, disgusted by their leader's cruelty, had joined the rebellion. Several Zaphirian splinter hives cut off from the collective chose freedom over slavery. Even a few young Nexari, inspired by human creativity, had abandoned their crystalline perfection to fight for something greater than themselves. Status report? Chen asked her multinational staff. All Allied fleets are in position, reported Commander Torres, now wearing the insignia of the Galactic Liberation Front. We have representatives from over 200 species. The hegemony is facing the largest rebellion in galactic history. Chen nodded, but her expression remained serious. Numbers won't be enough. The hegemony still has superior technology and 3,000 years of military experience. We need something more. That something more turned out to be humanity's greatest discovery yet: the power of shared knowledge. Working with their allies, human scientists had created something unprecedented in galactic history. They called it the Unity Network, a system that allowed different species to share their knowledge and abilities in real time. A human pilot could temporarily gain the enhanced reflexes of a Keth warrior. A Trelawney engineer could access the collective memory of a Zaphirian hive. A Voss energy being could learn to use Nexari reality-bending technology. The network was voluntary and temporary. No one lost their individuality or free will. But for the duration of a battle, hundreds of species could work together as if they were a single, incredibly diverse organism. The final battle began when the hegemony fleet arrived at Earth's solar system. They came in 3 waves, each one larger than any force that had ever attacked the human homeworld. The first wave was all Sorok ships, advancing in perfect military formation. Their weapons were more powerful than ever, enhanced with technology stolen from defeated species over 3 millennia. Their tactics were flawless, refined through countless victories, but the Allied fleet was ready for them. Using the Unity Network, human commanders shared their tactical knowledge with Sorok defectors who knew every weakness in hegemony military doctrine. Keth shapeshifters took on the forms of Sorok vessels, confusing enemy targeting systems. Zarketh ancient warriors, survivors of the first great defeat, finally got their chance for revenge. The Sorok advance was stopped cold. For every Allied ship they destroyed, they lost 2 of their own. Thexakar himself died when his flagship was rammed by a human vessel, piloted by a volunteer who had lost his family in the first attack on Earth 5 years earlier. The second wave was the Zaphirian swarm, millions of bioships moving with perfect coordination under Queen Mind Zixara's control. They had learned from their previous defeat and brought new defenses against jamming technology. But the Allies had learned too. Instead of trying to disrupt the collective's communication, they infiltrated it. Zaphirian defectors helped human hackers insert false information into the hive mind network. Suddenly, parts of the swarm began attacking each other, convinced by corrupted data that their own allies were enemy vessels in disguise. The chaos that followed was devastating. Zixara tried desperately to regain control, but the damage was done. The perfect unity of the collective had been shattered, turned into a weakness that destroyed the swarm from within. The third wave was the most dangerous. Fexathul led the Nexari crystal fleet personally, using reality-shaping technology to bend space and time around his vessels. His ships moved through dimensions that other species couldn't even perceive, attacking from angles that didn't exist in normal space. But humanity's greatest strength had always been their ability to learn from their enemies. They had spent years studying captured Nexari technology, not just copying it but understanding the principles behind it. Working with defector Nexari scientists, they had learned to create their own version of reality-bending weapons. The final confrontation was a battle between two forces that could rewrite the laws of physics. Nexari ships aged enemy vessels until they crumbled to dust, while human ships created time loops that trapped hegemony forces in endless moments of destruction. Crystal beams turned matter into energy, while allied weapons transformed energy back into matter in the enemy's engines. The battle reached its climax when Admiral Chen led a strike force directly at Vexthul's command ship. Using every piece of technology humanity and its allies had developed, her small fleet punched through defenses that should have been impenetrable. Chen's flagship, the Defiance, was a masterpiece of galactic cooperation. Its hull was made from living Keth metal that could repair itself. Its weapons were powered by Voss energy beings and guided by Trelawney computers. Its defenses used Mordai stealth technology and Quintel sonic barriers. Most importantly, its crew included representatives from dozens of species, all working together through the Unity network. When the Defiance finally confronted Vexthul's vessel, the Crystal Emperor was waiting for them. His ship was a work of art, beautiful and deadly, covered in crystal formations that bent light in impossible ways. "You cannot defeat perfection," Vexthul transmitted, his voice like breaking glass. "We are the apex of evolution, the ultimate expression of order and power." Chen's reply was simple: "Perfect things don't grow, and growth is what life is all about." The final duel between the two ships lasted only minutes, but those minutes felt like hours. Crystal beams that could cut through planets clashed with weapons that shouldn't have existed. Reality bent and twisted around both vessels as they fought with forces that could reshape the universe itself. In the end, it wasn't superior technology that won the battle. It was cooperation. The Defiance was crewed by dozens of species working together, each one contributing their unique abilities to the fight. Vexthul, for all his power, was alone in his perfect crystalline ship. When the Crystal Emperor's vessel finally exploded, the blast created a rainbow of light that could be seen throughout the solar system. The most beautiful ship in the galaxy became the most beautiful explosion, and with it died the last of the hegemony's supreme leaders. The surviving hegemony ships retreated immediately. Without their leaders and with their perfect armies defeated, they had no choice but to surrender or flee. Most chose to flee. Dissap the hunted become hunters. 3 years had passed since the great victory at Earth. The galaxy was changing in ways no one had thought possible. Where once the hegemony's iron grip had crushed all hope, now free worlds were emerging like flowers after a long winter. Admiral Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the Liberation, humanity's flagship and the symbol of the new galactic order. Through the viewports, she could see the fleet that had assembled for what everyone hoped would be the final campaign. Ships from hundreds of worlds flew together in formations that would have been impossible just a few years ago. The Galactic Liberation Front had grown beyond anyone's wildest dreams. What had started as humanity's desperate fight for survival had become a movement that spanned the entire galaxy. Enslaved species had risen up on thousands of worlds. Hidden refugees had emerged from hiding to join the fight. Even members of the hegemony's own species had defected in massive numbers. But victory was not yet complete. The remaining hegemony forces had retreated to their core worlds, the heavily fortified systems where their civilization had first begun. These worlds were protected by defenses built over millennia, weapons and shields that had never been tested in real combat, because no enemy had ever gotten close enough to attack them. The final stronghold was Dominion Prime, the capital world of the hegemony empire. It was here that the surviving leaders of all three species had gathered for their last stand. They had sworn to fight to the death rather than surrender their ancient power. "Status report," Chen asked her multi-species command staff. "All fleets are in position," reported Commander Torres. "The siege has lasted 8 months, but their defenses are finally weakening." Chen nodded. The siege of Dominion Prime had been unlike any military operation in galactic history. Instead of simply attacking the planet, the Liberation Front had surrounded it completely, cutting off all supply lines and communications. They had turned the hegemony's greatest strength, their isolation from the rest of the galaxy, into their weakness. What about the civilian population? Chen asked. This was the question that had kept her awake for months. Dominion Prime was home to billions of hegemony citizens, most of whom had never directly participated in their government's crimes. The Liberation Front was committed to ending the hegemony's reign of terror, but they refused to become terrorists themselves. Evacuation ships are standing by, reported Dr. Yuki Tanaka, the human psychologist who had become the front's expert on post-war recovery. We've been broadcasting surrender terms for months. Any civilian who wants to leave will be given safe passage to neutral worlds. And the military forces? Still refusing all contact, said Commander Veltar, a Saurak defector who had joined the Liberation Front after witnessing his government's atrocities. The remaining leaders have convinced their followers that surrender means extinction, Chen sighed. She understood their fear. For 3,000 years, the hegemony had shown no mercy to defeated enemies. They assumed that other species would treat them the same way. But the Liberation Front was different. They had to be different, or they would just become another empire built on fear and oppression. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Deep in the hegemony's archives, Allied intelligence teams had discovered records of the species that had existed before the hegemony's rise to power. These records revealed a shocking truth. The Saurak, Zaphirans, and Nexari had not always been conquerors. Originally, they had been just another group of species trying to survive in a dangerous galaxy. They had formed their alliance for mutual protection against a genuine threat, an ancient machine intelligence that had tried to wipe out all organic life. The hegemony had actually saved the galaxy once, destroying the machines and protecting countless worlds. But somewhere along the way, they had forgotten their original purpose. The alliance created to protect life had become a machine for destroying it. The heroes had become the monsters they had once fought against. When this information was broadcast throughout hegemony space, the effect was immediate and dramatic. Millions of hegemony citizens, learning the true history of their civilization for the first time, began to question everything they had been taught. Resistance movements formed on dozens of hegemony worlds. Most importantly, the broadcast reached the military forces defending Dominion Prime. For the first time in generations, hegemony soldiers began to wonder if they were fighting for the right cause. The rebellion began with a single Zaphirian hive cluster breaking away from the collective. Queen Sub Zixella, a younger relative of the deceased Queen Mind Zixara, led her followers out of the main hive network and established contact with the Liberation Front. We remember, she transmitted to Admiral Chen. Before the endless conquest, before the hunger for power, we remember what we were meant to be. We were protectors, not destroyers. Her defection created a crack in the collective's unity that quickly widened. Other hive clusters began to question their orders. The perfect coordination that had been the Zaphirians' greatest strength became their weakness as doubt spread through their ranks like a virus. The Saurak military was next. General Kethvar, the current supreme commander of hegemony forces, had been a career soldier for over 2 centuries. He had never questioned his orders, never doubted the righteousness of his cause. But the historical records changed everything. He had joined the military to protect his people, not to slaughter innocents. Learning that his ancestors had once been noble protectors while he had become nothing more than a mass murderer was too much for his rigid sense of honor to bear. In a ceremony broadcast throughout hegemony space, General Kethvar removed his rank insignia and laid down his weapons. "I cannot serve a cause that has forgotten its purpose," he declared. The hegemony ended the day we chose conquest over protection. His defection triggered a cascade of surrenders throughout the Saurak military. Entire fleets changed sides, bringing with them detailed intelligence about Dominion Prime's defenses. Only the Nexari remained unified in their resistance. Crystal Regent Nexius, the current leader of the Crystalline Empire, refused all communication with the Liberation Front. He had sealed himself and his most loyal followers in the planet's central fortress, a massive crystal structure that could generate reality-distorting fields strong enough to protect against any known weapon. "The Nexari will never surrender," he had declared in his last transmission. "We are perfection itself. We cannot be improved upon, and we will not be reduced." Admiral Chen studied the tactical displays showing Dominion Prime's remaining defenses. The crystal fortress was indeed nearly impregnable. Its reality-bending fields could deflect any physical attack and neutralize most energy weapons. Conventional assault was impossible. But the Liberation Front had learned that conventional tactics were rarely the answer when fighting the hegemony. "I have an idea," said Dr. Tanaka during the final strategy meeting. "We've been thinking about this wrong. We're trying to defeat Nexius through force, but force isn't what the Nexari fear most." "What do they fear?" asked Commander Torres. "Imperfection," Tanaka replied. "The Nexari define themselves by their flawless crystalline structure and perfect logical thinking. But what if we could show them that perfection itself is flawed?" The plan that emerged was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Instead of attacking the Crystal Fortress, the Liberation Front would surround it with something the Nexari could not tolerate: chaos. Ships from hundreds of different species took positions around the fortress, each one broadcasting on different frequencies, using different technologies, speaking different languages. The cacophony of diverse voices and conflicting signals created a storm of information that confused and overwhelmed the Nexari's perfect logical systems. But the real attack came from within. Using technology developed by studying captured Nexari equipment, human scientists had created a unique weapon, a virus made of pure creativity. The virus was not designed to destroy or corrupt. Instead, it introduced random elements into the fortress's perfect crystalline structure. Each infected crystal would develop tiny flaws, microscopic imperfections that served no purpose and followed no logical pattern. For beings who defined themselves by their flawless perfection, these meaningless imperfections were worse than death. The virus spread through the fortress like wildfire, carried by the very crystal matrix that was supposed to protect the Nexari. Crystal Regent Nexius watched in horror as his perfect fortress began to develop random colors, strange patterns, and asymmetrical formations. The walls that had been smooth as glass now showed scratches and bumps that served no function except to exist. "This is not possible," he transmitted, his voice filled with panic. "Perfection cannot be corrupted. Order cannot become chaos." Admiral Chen's response was gentle but firm. "Nothing in the universe is perfect forever. Even stars burn out eventually, but that doesn't make them failures. It makes them part of something larger." The final surrender came not through force, but through understanding. As the virus continued to spread through his fortress, Nexius began to see something he had never noticed before.